So there's a lot that I'd like to do to keep America moving, but the law is the law. And no one person is above the law, not even the president. Then, Elko, I need you. I need you to go out and talk to your friends and talk to your neighbors. I want you to talk to them whether they're independent or whether they are Republican. I want you to argue with them and get in their face, and if they tell you that, well, we're not sure where he stands on guns, I want you to say he believes in the Second Amendment. If they tell you, well, he's going to raise your taxes, you say, no, he's not, he's going to lower them.
All right, well, let's bring in now President Obama. Today, John Cass, who is a columnist with the Chicago Tribune, tweeted this. Obama also joked about rubbing out his opponents the Chicago way. If they bring a knife to the fight, we bring a gun. Obama, Philly, 2008.
Black Lives Matter now facing some serious consequences for messages like this one. Well, the Black Lives Matter is now being sued by a black Dallas police officer. Sergeant Demetric Penny claims Black Lives Matter and their supporters have incited a, quote, race war and violence against police. Al Sharpton, George Soros, President Obama, and Hillary Clinton all named in that lawsuit. Well, 5 Dallas officers were killed during an ambush at the end of a Black Lives Matter protest back in July.
Hey YouTube, so here's how the mainstream liberal media bias works. While sometimes they have a double standard in their reporting, or sometimes they just flat out lie, most of the time their bias is much more insidious. Instead of showing their true colors, the mainstream media simply refuses to report on certain stories. If a conservative makes a mistake, grrr, the media is all over it. But if a liberal makes a mistake, it's completely ignored. Take the latest Obama interview, for example.
I have bent over backwards to work with the Republican Party and have purposely kept my rhetoric down. I think I'm pretty well known for being a calm guy.
Now that's the most ridiculous thing I've heard since Sarah Palin said she could see Russia from her house. Which she never said, so technically that makes this the most absurd thing ever. First off, Obama's never even tried to work with conservatives or libertarians. In fact, he's openly said that he doesn't even want their voices in political debate.
But I don't want the folks who created the mess, I don't want the folks who created the mess do a lot of talking. I want them just to get out of the way so we can clean up the mess.
Yeah, I don't know how you can bend over backwards for someone you want out of the way.
I need you to go out and talk to your friends and talk to your neighbors. I want you to talk to them whether they're independent or whether they are Republican. I want you to argue with them and get in their face. We talk to these folks because they potentially have the best answers, so I know who's ass to kick.
Getting in people's faces and looking to kick ass doesn't sound like Obama's trying to turn down the rhetoric. If Sarah Palin had said something similar, the media would be accusing her of trying to start a civil war. But Obama can get away with anything because that's how mainstream media bias works.
If Latinos sit out the election, instead of saying we're going to punish our enemies and we're going to reward our friends who stand with us on issues that are important to us, if they don't see that kind of upsurge in voting in this election, then I think it's going to be harder.
If any conservative or libertarian politician encouraged Latino voters to do the same thing and punish their fellow Americans, their career would be over. And finally, there's the quote so controversial that almost every video of it has been removed. But fortunately, it's so well documented that when referring to his political opponents, Obama said, "If they bring a knife to the fight, we bring a gun." So what's the point of this video? The liberal media, including my fellow creators here on YouTube, don't necessarily have to lie to you in order to influence your opinion. Sometimes they just conveniently fail to report the fact.
They don't want this information coming out. Now, Joel Gilbert, for the rest of the hour, we're going to go into the next hour. I'm going to give you the floor here to run through some of the background of Obama for new listeners, who Frank Marshall Davis is, Dreams of My Real Father. We can put some images from the trailer, Dreams of My Real Father, up on screen for TV viewers. Again, we're a simulcast for your new viewers or listeners. And roll through kind of the background and then the new big bombshells. You've been to Hawaii. You've been to the prisons. You've been to California. You've gone and met with his admitted best friend from college. I mean, you have really done it. And then once you exposed all this, it turns out, hiding in plain view, Obama's always pretty much been admitting it. So let's get into the new bombshell information with investigative journalist, documentary filmmaker Joel Gilbert.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Look, the biggest piece of fake news, when they came out with this new term, I guess Hillary brought it up, I just had to laugh because the biggest fake news was Barack Obama claiming to be the son of a Kenyan goat herder who would bring people together. In his book, Dreams from My Father, myself and others were investigating his background, and through my film, Dreams from My Real Father, it was an alternate history that showed that Barack Obama's actual background was a radical leftist. And it traced back to the fact that there was a mountain of evidence that his real biological father was not the Kenyan Obama, but was rather Frank Marshall Davis, the Soviet agent and American communist, who he admits in his own book raised him in Hawaii. In Obama's own book, Dreams from My Father, he says, when I was little, my grandfather would take me to Frank's house, and it was though there was an unwritten, unspoken contract between the two of them. He also dropped a hint when the Kenyan died. He said, I had no documentation to prove that the Kenyan was my real father. So he's been dropping hints. And I reached out, since my film came out, I reached out to Keith Kakagawa. Keith Kakagawa was the character known as Ray in Obama's book. Ray was actually the name of their drug dealer from the Chum gang. There's Ray. His real name is Keith Kakagawa. Obama claimed he was black. In fact, he's actually half Hawaiian, half a quarter Indian, and a quarter black. But Keith has been in and out of prison his whole life, unfortunately. He was part of that Chum gang pot-smoking ring at Punahou. And I became friendly with Keith. He's in prison at Corcoran State Prison in Central California, along with Charles Manson. He's a very, actually, nice, sincere guy. And he was able to share with me over the couple of years that I've known him a lot of information and bombshell information about Barack's upbringing and his relationship with Frank Marshall Davis. I'm going to get into some of those. Here's an example for people on TV. You can see one of the letters from prison, which he sent me many of. And we met quite often and speak all the time. The first things he told me were about Obama becoming very racist and racial, which he said was a result of him hanging out with Frank Marshall Davis 3 or 4 times a week, at least for an hour, and that Frank was essentially his father in every meaning of the word. He gave examples, for instance, that they went to the senior prom, and even though they were 15 years old and the girls were 17 and 18, and Barry, as he calls him, complained that the seniors won't dance with him because he's black. And Keith would point out and say, well, no, it's because we're 15 and we're dressed for a luau. And then Barry complained that he wasn't able to start on the basketball team because he was black. And Keith told him, no, it's because you can't make a shot and you can't rebound. You're on the team because you're black. And Barry went on to talk about how his own grandfather couldn't understand him because he was black. So he said that Barry became a radical wannabe, and it was a result of Frank Marshall Davis turning him on to Angela Davis and Malcolm X, and Barry becoming extremely racial about everything. Then he tells me this bombshell story that when in 1977, he was with Barack, or Barry as he called him, in the Ala Manoa Mall in Waikiki at a sporting goods store. And all of a sudden, Barry says, that's my father over there. And Keith says, what are you talking about? That black man there, I recognize him from the pictures. That's my father from Kenya. And Keith said, no way. And Barack ran over to him, and he said, are you Barack Obama? And he said, yes, who are you? He said, well, I'm your son. He said, well, what are you doing in Hawaii? He said, well, I'm on a layover from Hong Kong going back to Kenya. And by the way, Malik Obama confirmed for me that his father had gone to Hong Kong at that time. And the Kenyan Obama basically blew off Barack, blew him off and left. And Keith explains that that moment set off Barry, or Barack, on a tirade where he went to his mother, Frank, his grandfather, and said, you all lied to me. Frank is my father. I've always known it. He spends time with me. He gives me money. I look like him. You've been lying to me. And he said for a couple of months, they all denied it. And Barry got so out of control that the grandfather, Gramps, came to Keith and said, listen, this story is true, but he can't talk about this. I don't want him talking about it. So next time he talks about it, I want you to smack him. And Keith said, I can't hit Barry. He said, no, you got to hit him next time he talks about this. So Keith said that sure enough, Barry kept screaming about it, and he put him in a chokehold, dragged him down the street. And then all of a sudden, Barry stopped talking about it. And this was about the time that this poem was wrote, people are familiar with, called Pop, where it's like an explanation of an encounter between a young man and an older man. And in the poem, he says, he looked just like me, he gave me a hug, and I could see myself inside of Pop's black frame glasses. So it's as if there was some kind of admission and they wrote a poem to kind of memorialize it. So this is a pretty bombshell. It comes from Obama's best friend, who's written about throughout his book as his best friend. And it shows that Barack had this big moment where he was lied to his whole life, but realized it came to know it was the biological father, and that Davis continued to be his ideological father and continued to radicalize him by taking him down to places like, this is also brand new news, there was a strip club in Hotel Street down in Honolulu called Hubba Hubba. And a lot of the Marines would go down and military would go down to Hotel Street. It's known for many, many years. So at Hubba Hubba, Frank would take him there. They would have these all kind of nefarious things I don't even want to say on this show.
Go ahead and say it.
Well, okay, I'll say it. Well, he basically said that the Hubba Hubba had private nights that were not advertised, where people would come and all kind of things would go on that you could possibly imagine, and that this was a location that Frank would take Barry. Now, interestingly, the manager...
So did he tell you sex parties?
Swingers parties, sex parties. So the manager of Hubba Hubba was none other than Honey Harlow. Honey Harlow was the famous stripper who was the ex-wife of Lenny Bruce, who lived in Honolulu all those years.
We have a photo of her?
Yes, we got a photo of Honey Harlow. Now, Honey Harlow, I've identified as the stripper who poses in the photos with Ann Dunham at Frank Marshall Davis's house that came out in my film. That is Honey Harlow. And
now, before we go here, let's rewind this for a minute for TV viewers and radio listeners.
Yeah.
People understand, if you've seen your film on this and you've done research and you've read Obama's book, he admits all this. In later versions, they took it out. So 95% of what you're saying is on record. You found photos of Obama with Frank Marshall Davis and people and with others, and it's the same house, it's the same couch, it's the same pictures. Then there's all this porn that Davis admittedly shot on the side. That's what communists do.
Correct.
To fund themselves, drugs, you name it. And so it's his mother, it's clearly her, posing. It's the same woman in the photos. All this from this racy culture in Hawaii in the 60s and the 70s. And, of course, before that, back in the 50s. So start at the beginning again.
Okay, so Frank Marshall Davis was a photographer of nude women, and he took these photos of Ann and Honey Harlow and other strippers and sold them to the Betty Page, strip magazines of the time.
And you were contacted by one of the famous off-record collectors of all this, saying, "Hey, I've got Obama's mother."
Yeah, we acquired this stuff about 4 years ago, and look, it's not to make fun of the fact that his mother was posing for nude photos. It's intended to show that there was the chance of a relationship to help prove the fact that Obama lied to the country. He ran as a mainstream candidate.
Well, he's a total government cutout, is the point, with multiple names. He's got passports and stuff that say Barry. He's got different last names on there. He lists himself as a Muslim in Indonesia. I mean, this guy has got more names than, a villain in a James Bond movie.
Well, here's the next revelation. We'll get back to Hubba Hubba, but...
well, no, I don't mean to interrupt you. Let's go back and finish up with the porn.
Okay, so Honey Harlow, who was the ex-wife of Lenny Bruce, she lived in Hawaii at the time. It's all documented, and that is her. I'm certain in the photos with Ann Dunham, that further places that photo in Hawaii, and you can see the obvious resemblance. And anyway, Keith Kakagawa told me that Frank would take Barry down there. They would do a lot of drinking and drugging, and this was the period where Obama became radicalized and saw the world through a racial lens, the same as Frank Marshall Davis. It's the same person as essentially Reverend Jeremiah Wright. Everything is racial. Everything is because of race. Now, the disappointment voters have with Obama is, of course, they voted for him based on this false news story that he floated in his book, that he's a post-racial person. He's going to bring us all together because of his unique...
But notice all he did was engage in race baiting and division massively.
Correct.
Down to even hiring organizers to go stir up riots.
Correct. And this is why it's important to really reveal who Obama was.
But does he even get that that causes cops to slow roll and kills thousands of black Americans, and that it creates real racism and division? I mean, I guess that's what they want.
It's not about that. It's about the revolution. It's about long-term control. And they realize...
so you got to radicalize and try to make as many black people as you can racial and hateful so they never assimilate and are happy.
Yeah, Obama wrote in his book about reading Fallon, you know, the Algerian Revolution, and they said there's going to be blood. There's going to be a price to pay for achieving long-term takeover and the leftist revolution. So all of these things are just, you know...
All I can say is good luck with them, with all their censorship, their plans for violence. I'm not looking for violence, but, man, these wimps want to start a physical fight. We are going to clean their clocks. I mean, these people can hardly tie their frickin' shoelaces. Libertarians, patriots, Americana people are wrecking machines. Go ahead.
Well, look, obviously the best way to cleanse the situation is truth and to illuminate and tell the truth about...
That's what we're going to do. But see, they know we're beating them in the info war, so they want to censor us and start a revolution.
Correct.
So all I'm saying is they're a bunch of idiots. The little communists they've got down here saying kill cops, oink, oink, bang, bang, you're dead. How many... it was 5 good cops dead, good, yeah, but 6 is better. These little minions don't even know how to point a gun the right way is what I'm saying. They are the most moron, cannon fodder idiots, and none of them will ever talk to you. They say, talk to my boss. It's always some old weird UT beatnik behind them because they have nothing in their heads.
That's correct. I've seen that a million times.
Joel Gilbert, get it and recap the previous ones real fast and get into the new ones.
Okay, I just talked about my friendship with Obama's best friend, Keith Kakagawa, who's in jail in Corcoran State Prison, who told me about how Barack Barry learned that the Kenyan was not his father and that Frank Marshall Davis was, how Davis radicalized Obama with his racist racial worldview, and how Obama would go to the Hubba Hubba strip club with Frank and met up with Honey Harlow, Lenny Bruce's ex-wife, who also was involved with his mother way back in the day with Frank Marshall Davis. So we went through that. And today I'm releasing kind of the rest of my Obama research for the past few years. I'm releasing 2 birth certificates today on InfoWars from black men born in Hawaii. One was born a few weeks before Obama and one born a few weeks after Obama. And in both of these birth certificates, the father is listed under the racial terminology that was encoded in the Hawaii guidebooks for the registrar. The racial designation was Negro, not African. Now, everyone knows that Obama's father's race is listed as African, of course, which is African American. Now, in this one that people can see on their screen, this is from a man named Bruce Henderson, born a few weeks after
That term
Obama.
wasn't used until the 80s.
Correct. Now, this is interesting. So this gentleman was born a few weeks after Obama, and you can also see how the type sticks to the background. And then we go to the second one, which was from a few weeks before. The man's name was James Gravely. And what's so interesting about James Gravely, the race originally was written down as colored, which was the terminology in the 50s that had just changed in 1960. The state of Hawaii issued a new guidebook for their registrars, but the person accidentally wrote the old term, which was colored. So the state of Hawaii registrar's office marked it out and wrote the correct new term, which was Negro. Therefore,
by the way, which is just Spanish for black, or it's like Caucasian, it's Caucasus Mountains.
Right.
But they turned that into a racist term. Words now are racist.
So this proves that Obama's birth certificate, where the race is listed as African, never would have survived the review at the Hawaii Department of Health. Just like the word colored didn't survive, the word African would not have survived because the term was Negro. Now, why would this, of course, what became known as the birther controversy was invented by the fake news media. People simply asked questions. They said, if you say you did all these things, why won't you release your college records? Why won't you release your Senate records? Why won't you release your birth certificate? People simply asked a question. Now, I guess they didn't make up the term universityism.
Notice how the green paper isn't yellowed either from acid like the original real ones. Totally fake. And again, we're not saying he wasn't really from Hawaii. It was just a fake certificate with the fake father supposedly from Kenya. They had to do that. Just like the FBI and others say cheese pizza means child porn. So you have Pizzagate. They then, in the media, focus on one pizza place, claiming we're all only talking about that to then discredit the entire Podesta emails. This is how they take things, and they decide what to make everybody focus in on. Then we all go chasing after it.
Right. So Obama's candidacy was based on his personal background. My father's a goat herder from Kenya. I have a multiracial background. I'm going to bring us together. I'm going to cut the deficit in half. So we asked a legitimate question: why can't we see your anything about your past? And the birth certificate,
college records are sealed, everything's sealed. So they turn us wanting to know about his past that's sealed into we're saying he isn't really from the U.S. He's from Kenya. So we look, and he is saying he's from Kenya in his college records and in his newspaper that he edited, and his wife's saying it. So we took the bait.
Right. So I think Obama's real. I don't believe the birth certificate he released is real only based on this. But you can also see in some other comparisons I released that Obama's birth certificate, the type is on a white background, whereas you can see the natural regular background, the black type sticks to the background. It's not on a white facade. And you can see that in these documents I'm releasing.
Sure, it's clearly digital. I mean, look, they even use like the Microsoft Word deal where a typewriter has a new original splat each time. With them, the letters and numbers are identical. They use different fonts per line, but you can see it's fake.
Right. So I believe Obama was always eligible to be president, was probably born in the United States, but it had his real birth certificate probably either was blank with the father unknown or even possibly Frank Marshall Davis. Now, had he released the birth certificate without the name Barack Obama on it, then I think it would have debunked his entire story.
Sure. How do you get the name Barry Soetoro? Because then we know that's on passports.
Well, the Soetoro, they also had another name, which was Sobarka, which showed up on other documents. So Soetoro was the name of Ann Dunham's next husband, which was Lola Soetoro. So when he went to Indonesia, he became Barry Soetoro. And the name Sobarka, people get that mixed up. The name Sobarka, which showed up, that's simply Soetoro Barak backwards, which is how they had names in Indonesia. Your family name was first, so it was combined as one name. But anyway, I want to release these birth certificates I collected because it shows that Obama was not honest about who his real father was. And this, as much as we don't like being lied to about that, obviously it hides the fact that Obama was indoctrinated and radicalized by his real father that he admits raised him by his own admission, Frank Marshall Davis, and he became this leftist radical, and he followed in the footsteps of his real father, dreams from his real father back to Chicago, and he became an agitator and eventually became president based on the fake news that his real father and upbringing was this generic upbringing that had nothing to do with a radical background. The next thing I want to get into is to discuss what I learned about Obama's Social Security number. It's pretty brief, but it's interesting. Keith Kakagawa told me that Obama had worked for his father, who had a pest control service called Island Pest Control in the summers, and that Barack is known to the public as having a Social Security number that was issued from Connecticut. And people say, well, how could that be? Well, Keith told me that Barack actually had several Social Security numbers, and that it was not uncommon that many people in Hawaii had several. There was massive document fraud and Social Security fraud, and that they would get aid from the government with multiple Social Security numbers and multiple identities. And I think it still goes on to this day. The entire state system in Hawaii was unreliable as regards documentation, and that he said Barry had several Social Security numbers, and that was simply one of them, I guess, that he settled on. So that was interesting, and that fills in some of the void. The next thing I want to do, can we cue that? There's a quick clip from Good Morning America where Barack talks about having studied abroad and lived abroad. And I want to give that some context and give you another piece of information.
Sure, here's the Good Morning America piece.
Are you concerned that your lack of experience when it comes to foreign policy may hurt your chances in the run for the White House?
Well, actually, my experience in foreign policy is probably more diverse than most others in the field. I mean, I'm somebody who has actually lived overseas, somebody who has studied overseas. I majored in international relations, but
So here Barack lets slip what he didn't want known. Now, his official story in his book is that he was at Columbia for 2 years, Occidental College in L.A. for 2 years, and transferred to Columbia for 2 years. And when he was running for president, Hannity, others came out and said, wait a minute, how could he have been at Columbia 2 years? We never met him. We never heard of him. Classmates never saw him. And in this interview, Barack reveals something. He says, I studied abroad and lived abroad. Now, he wasn't talking about when I was 5 years old, I was in kindergarten in Indonesia. He let it slip that he was abroad for a study program. Now,
you've been saying that for years.
Right. So my belief, and I'll tell you why I believe this, is that he was on a junior year abroad in Pakistan as a junior. Now, he talked about being an international studies major here, not a political science major. All the international studies majors at Oxford.
Sure, and that's the word. I mean, there's so many people from Brennan to him are reportedly converted to Wahhabism, and he wears that ring and the rest of it. They say when he gave that first speech in Cairo that he spoke better than major imams. And so are you getting at the fact that he was radicalized in Pakistan?
Correct. His affinity toward, first of all, his affinity toward Islam, his knowledge of Islam, of the culture, the Quran, the all those terminology that he knows, and just his cultural affinity.
And then backing at least 10 countries taken over by the jihadis out of Saudi Arabia in his 8 years in office. I mean, this guy has turned the world over to Islam.
Well, his knowledge and affinity for Islam reflects someone who spent time in a Muslim country as an adult. Now,
not just Indonesia.
Not as a child in Indonesia. So his mother was...
But he did go to a madrasa in Indonesia.
When he was a small child. But his mother was living in Pakistan at the time. And I'm going to now reveal my conversation with Peter Geithner. Peter Geithner was head of the Ford Foundation in Asia. He lived in Hong Kong.
You talked to Geithner. This is huge.
Correct. Peter Geithner, who unfortunately passed away just recently. He's the father of Timothy Geithner, the former Treasury Secretary for Barack Obama. What a coincidence.
No, the Ford Foundation runs the whole globalist leftist takeover.
And they're a big part of Columbia University as well. So Peter Geithner met Ann Dunham. He was Ann Dunham's boss when she worked for the Ford Foundation in Indonesia. And Peter told me that Barack had a Ford Foundation scholarship. This is big news, to go to Columbia. And he also said it was for the senior year. So what this reveals, a couple of things. Number one.
How do you get these people to talk to you? How did you get Geithner's dad to talk to you?
I just called him up. I would like to say maybe it's the charm. Jerry Corsi says it's the long hair. But you figure on the phone he wouldn't know about that. But I've just always been honest and sincere. And I say, I got a problem. Can you help me with this? And I want to tell you why this is so significant. Number one, because Ann Dunham, Obama's mother, worked for the Ford Foundation, it would have been illegal, and they have very strong laws against nepotism, for Obama to get a Ford Foundation scholarship to Columbia. It would have been illegal. And I think this explains why Obama was a ghost at Columbia. First of all, I think he was only there the senior year, and that's why he didn't join all these organizations and was a well-known person like he was at Occidental and Harvard. Obama's half-sister Maya went to Barnard, by the way. She's also a ghost. You can't find her in any of the yearbooks, photos, nothing. Anyway, Geithner said he had a Ford Foundation scholarship. Now, so Khaled Siddiqui was the Pakistani waiter who he was a roommate of with Obama on 109th Street in East Side. There he is. And Siddiqui told me that Obama came to New York for the first time, just showed up and called him because he needed a place to stay. Again, that's the senior year. So there's a lot of evidence that shows that Obama was never there for the junior year.
Sure, the guy's got a total CIA sheep dip from birth. Joel Gilbert, filmmaker of JoelGilbert.net's here. He has dropped more than 10 major bombshells. He's down to the last few right now in his in-depth, long-term investigations, the things he's never released on Obama that he's gleaned the last few years. Now that Obama's about to go into private action against us, Joel Gilbert is dropping these truth bombs. So let's get into the nose job.
Yeah, the last one of the last ones here, had this in my film, but we've got more information. And this is just part of Obama trying to hide the fact that his real biological father and ideological mentor was a Soviet agent and American communist. He ran for president saying, my father's a goat herder, I'm going to bring us all together. Had we known the truth, had he said my father was a Soviet agent who wanted to destroy America and helped the Soviet Union during the Cold War, we never would have elected him. We would not have suffered these 8 years of Obama's fake presidency. The nose job was a way that Obama could hide his stark resemblance to his real father, Frank Marshall Davis. We had plastic surgeons look at this. It's on the website. They testified to it. Obama had an exact Frank Marshall Davis larger nose. I believe he also had a lower lip job, which we haven't verified with plastic surgeons.
So they made his nose narrower?
They made his
nose it clearly did.
Smaller and narrower because he looked so much like Frank Marshall Davis. Any connection to Davis would have eliminated him from
they took the bump off his nose. They made it a lot less wide.
Correct. So he still, to this day, looks almost exactly like Davis, but the nose really told a story. And
when did he get the nose job? I mean, but 1990, clearly he still had his regular nose.
I believe he had one in 2003, and he may have had several, because it just, every time it gets a little bigger, it kind of starts to get smaller. So it's quite obvious, and there's plastic surgeons on my website that are very well known nationally that have attested.
Well, you can see the bisectional line down the middle.
Yeah. So all of...
you even see the scar. Good Lord. You can see the scar right there.
Yeah. Oh, on the lower lip, you can see a scar. Also, if you look closely, his lower lip does not match the upper lip when you see him in photos.
Well, it's like Michael Jackson. You ought to be proud of how he looked. I think he looked better before.
I think so, too, you know. But the spitting image of Frank Marshall Davis would reveal an ideology that he did come from a hard left communist background and had no intention of serving America. Instead, it was to serve this leftist ideology, which wants to throw open the borders, legalize drugs, diminish America's place in the world.
You know, here's where I don't say we differ. I don't like the drug culture. I know it's destructive. But then the police state that comes out of throwing nonviolent people in jail for using drugs is another evil. I'm for decriminalization. I don't think we like liquor or whatever. It just shouldn't be everywhere. I get Soros is pushing it because the new weed is so strong. It puts you in a little, catatonic fetal position. And I understand the drug culture is part of what the left pushes. But a lot of areas of Europe have decriminalized. It's made drug use actually go down.
Look, I visited Obama's best friend Keith in prison, and I saw a lot of people there for drug offenses. Keith himself has been in and out of jail his whole life for drug offenses. And I think once you go in there and see that these people are just kind of wasting away, he is in a treatment center. It's a substance abuse center. There I am at Corcoran State Prison in the photo if you're watching on TV. It is a treatment center, but he does complain, though, that since Obama's push to help transsexuals, that many prisoners are now transgender and transsexual, and he finds it very difficult to live in an environment where...
Well, what they do is, I mean, they get kids and they confuse them when they're young, or prisoners, guys that are in there doing it, and it's just they push it, and it's all part of the dehumanization. I'm not against anybody that really thinks they're a man or a woman or whatever. I'm a libertarian, but clearly it's being pushed as an agenda.
That's the complaint, and it's in the prison system as well. That's what I found out.
Our fellow info warriors across the United States and across the planet really love the Hillary for Prison 2016 shirts that we began to put out in 2015. It became a global meme against globalism and corruption, and a very strong maxim that's now being continued on today. So we now have George Soros, because the media attacked me on this whole goblin meme, and they've made huge jokes about it, but it's totally blown up in their face. We now have George Soros as a goblin on the back, and it says, with a cross through him, an X like Ghostbusters, no Soros, him as a goblin. It says Deport Soros on the bottom, and on the top it says InfoWars established 1996. So it is a limited edition Deport Soros on the back, Hillary for Prison on the front, right-hand shoulder, Infowars.com. It's powerful. Hope you get out to everybody you know. Infowarsstore.com, or call 888-253-3139.